All right, everybody, welcome. I hope that you are doing well. I am, except Texas, well, it's hotter than hell. That's the truth. So I know that Arizona is struggling with this weird, horrible heat. I get it. We are having this heat because the sun is having a temper tantrum. So we're there's no place to hide. You can't run, you can't hide. It's here. We just gotta figure out how to stay cool. All right, now then, um, there's a lot going on in the world of true crime. There are a lot of very interesting tales and news events and items, and it is very difficult to sort of sort through it all. Let me start with Koberger, the Linda Lane footage that was posted, little clip 12:37 to 12:39, 38, 39ish, about a minute and a half clip. Oh my gosh, I've heard some very disturbing things. I've made the command decision to take a step back, take a couple of days to rethink this and how I want to move forward, because I cannot fall into this trap of accusing victims, or I just can't do that, or going against police, law enforcement. So I have to be careful, but because that footage is really controversial in my opinion, and for all intent purposes it does look authentic. There are many people that are now coming out behind the scenes, particularly, but some now are speaking out, believing that it is the defense that is putting these clips out. But they better be careful if it is them, because they're about to make the judge mad. They're trying to get the prosecution is not happy with some of the rulings that the judge has made. So prosecution is sort of pushing back and saying, Judge, this isn't fair. He hasn't waived his right to a speedy trial, and yet you're giving them continuances, or not continuances, but what do you call it? Little periods of time. This is wrong. Can't keep doing this. And I think hey, language of horses, welcome. I think that the judge that the prosecution in particular is getting really tired of these little games. And if you're the judge, if you're sitting there on this case and you've issued this sweeping, gag order, and you've got someone who may actually be dropping evidence, leaking evidence, I cannot imagine that Judge is happy about these Linda Lane recordings. So my guess is, even though all looks calm on the surface of things, my guess is there are some heated conversations happening between the judge and the prosecutor and the defense, saying, what is happening? And you better clean your ship up wherever this is coming from. I'm gonna lower the hammer on this eventually if you don't get under control. So no, I don't think things are good right now. And whoever it is that is leaking this, if you're just a citizen and you're leaking this because notoriety or money or fame or narcissistic supply or whatever it is, then well, go find you a good therapist, because the guy that is in jail right now is accused of murdering 4 young people, and you may interfere with the successful prosecution of this case. The flip side of that is that Koberger is an American citizen, and he is entitled to have a fair trial. And you may be interfering with that. So I'm not abandoning the Linda Lane footage. I'm not leaving it. I know what I'm doing on my next video. I've got it planned. But I wanted to step back because when people start saying, well, that's Xana and that's Ethan, and stop. That young lady that is in that video clip, Xana's not anywhere close to being that tall. That is not Xana. It's just not. And then I thought, well, what are they? Maybe they're talking about the person talking that says, it's too hot. But I don't even think that's right. I don't think it's Ethan. I don't think that. There are two people that it has been suggested to me that it may be. And after looking at lots of photographs and maybe some video, maybe I'm maybe you may be right, War Eagle. That's not Xana and it's not Ethan. So I wanted to take a little bit of time, step back away from it because people are getting a little, carried away in their imagination. I don't want to ever get involved in victim shaming or victim blaming. And this got a little too close for comfort for me. So I don't want to be sensationalist. I just want to be factual, accurate, and when I'm speculating, I come out and say, it's a wild speculation. I do own it. So what does that mean for what we're going to talk about today? Well, we're going to talk about Rex Heuerberger in a roundabout kind of way. More people are talking about his family, and specifically Craig, his brother, who is 1.5 years, 2 years younger than him. Rex was around 11 or 12 when his father died, and the little brother Craig would have been around 10-ish. The mother of Rex and Craig Heuerberger is still alive. She's something like 92, 93 years old. And it was actually she who sold that rundown house to an architect back 97 when the market crashed so horribly. You don't know if he was if maybe he had lost a lot of money or what. Come on, let's be really honest about this. Rex Heuerberger has had a very successful architect firm, not just creating, not just working to do the work of an architect in terms of designing and whatnot, but I think he's pretty clear. His big claim to fame, sorry. His big claim to fame has really been as a consultant working with the city of Manhattan or the state of New York and helping individual contractors and other architects and whatnot manage all the old buildings. And when you're trying to take an old building and you want to update it and modernize it, how do you go from building code in the early 1900s, 1890 in one of his cases, turn of the century? How do you take that building built according to that building code and bring it up to 2020 building code? He's the expert in this. He's the guy. So when professionals who are in a high income profession anyway, they carve out their own specialized little niche, that's when the money begins to roll in. Okay. Because he can charge whatever he wants to charge. There's really not many people doing what he does. So he's very successful. Where's the money? Like, what do you do with it? Because it's a lot. If you go, Manhattan would command the highest fees. It's a curiosity, to say the least. Now then, that does bring us to the unusual nature. So we know he didn't waste money on housing. That falling down house that he's living in, it's basically paid for at this point. It was $160,000, something like that. I mean, very, by today's standards, very small. He obviously has not done any kind of update on it. In fact, the photographs emerging around that property, it's a pigsty, as my grandma used to say. So what's he doing? His backyard is very curious, and he's got things with big giant tarps covering them up. Is very interesting. When they went in with a search warrant, yes, they drove away with a vehicle, but then they had some odd, like an item that looked like some kind of room or a large locker of some sort. It got hauled away on a flatbed truck too. And you ask, well, what could that have been? There was an interior designer that was going to do some work for Heuermann on the home. And she came to take measurements. He wanted, I think they were going to upgrade the kitchen, if I remember correctly. They were going to upgrade the kitchen, and he wanted her to do full measurement of the entire house. Leads one to believe that he was toying with the idea of upgrading it, making it match the other houses in the neighborhood, perhaps, or at least be a finer reflection on his skill and profession, rather than what it was. And so when she got there and she began taking these measurements and whatnot, he really freaked out. She had gone down into the basement, and there was a door down there that was locked. And when she tried to open it, he really became uncomfortable and was like, no, get away from the door. And so he directed her away from the door, and it was really surprising to her because it was so dramatic. It was so dramatically different than how this project all unfolded of, hey, we want to upgrade the kitchen. And then it turned in, oh, hell, just measure the whole damn house, which do everything. And so you come to this one door in the basement, and she was very clear. He got very weirded out when she tried to go in there. She estimates, according to the measurements, this interior designer, according to the estimates that she took, it's a room about 12 by 15 feet. It's a pretty good size little bedroom, right? I mean, it's not like a big, huge master bedroom, but it's a usable size of a room, and it's in the basement, and it is locked, and he freaked out. So let your imagination run wild. Now, that leads us to the second point, and that is his brother, Craig. So we talked about the other day that both Craig and Rex, well, they live on the fringe of society. And you're like, no, they don't. Rex is, a big fancy architect in Manhattan. He's not on the edge. Okay, you got me there. That's his business persona, correct? But what kind of man or what kind of person focuses, opens up their business in literally the most valuable real estate in the world? True. He sets up shop in the most valuable real estate in the world to compete against the most accomplished architects in the business. And when he gets on the train at night to go home, he goes home to what looks to be this very beautiful, well-established, sleepy bedroom community where wealthy wives play tennis all day and the children run around barefoot without a care in the world. And he gets off the train and he goes to a place that people will cross the road to avoid having to get near the house. That many of the neighbors have come out and said, it's like the Halloween house, right? It's like the house in the neighborhood where the kids get together and they dare one another to run up and touch the door. That there's tales of witches and ghouls and goblins, living there. And so the kids get a little thrill out of being frightened. But some adults were frightened of this guy. He was a very odd man. He's peering over the the backyard fence, watching his next door neighbor sunbathe in her backyard. I mean, you want to get a nice tan. instead of going to the pool or out where people can see you, you just lay out in your own backyard. There's a fence around it. Nobody should be able to see. You should have your privacy. This creep is standing there peering over the fence, watching. It's like, really? This is a big problem here. So add to serial killer, tax evasion, abuser, add peeping Tom to this list. So he does live on the edge. He lives on the fringe. I suspect that when he goes into work, he puts on his "I'm Rex Heuerberger, the architect" clothing. And so as he's going through the day in Manhattan, he is an architect, and he is sufficiently compartmentalized that he literally probably gave very little thought to his hobbies. And then once he gets on the train headed home, the monster then returns and takes over. He goes home to an embarrassing, I want you to imagine being an architect and you live in a house that hasn't been updated since the 90s, and the small children in the neighborhood are afraid of you and your house. So there's such a dramatic disconnect in that. Alfred Adler, everybody here knows about Freud and Piaget, I guess. But Alfred Adler, in my estimations, my personal, experiences, Adler really has it. He was really close to kind of nailing this idea of what makes us mentally well. How do we set out to engineer a life that we are happy and we are healthy and we are productive and we're authentic and real and not hiding or pretending to play a role? Well, what Alfred Adler would have loved to have had to say about Rex Heuerberger, man, that would have been something I would have paid money to go see, because the foundation is, there basically you consider two conditions, and one is to consider the person in their dream or best life position, their best life role. As they go through day to day, what do they dream of being? Like, how could they be at their very best, right? The second condition is to consider, what are they really? Like, when they wake up in the morning, they put their clothes on, they get out and start their day. What kind of person are they? How are they living their lives? And here is the crux. Sorry, it's in my way. If you consider the ideal self and then the person that you actually are, the further away those two things are, the more mental health problems you're going to encounter. That you have an ideal, and then as your actual self approaches your ideal, that is when you are at your best. Well, Rex Heuerberger was like, his ideal self was in Hawaii, and his actual self was in the Antarctic. They were so far apart, not even close, that he's actually compartmentalized into at least two separate types of personas, in my opinion. So it's no wonder, that he's struggling. He and his brother both are described as very scary people. Craig, his brother, is a guy that, he was convicted of manslaughter. He killed the chief of police, little thing like that, while he was drunk driving. He did serve a little bit of time, and then he basically, fell off the edge of the world. He went to South Carolina, and he bought some land and lives in a little trailer with his girlfriend. And Rex went and bought like 5 parcels of land next to where Craig lived, it's a shady serial killer kind of property as well. And the discussion Craig was having around some of the locals in South Carolina was that one day Rex would be retiring. And when he retired, he would be moving to South Carolina where they would set up a compound. This is like the scariest prepper scenario imaginable. Now, here's the deal. This guy, when they went in and arrested him, they went in with their search warrants, they began to collect evidence. They found more than 200 firearms. That's a lot of weaponry. I don't know how much ammunition it is, but I do know that these people that are into the whole prepping movement, you know, and all that, militia and whatnot, they may buy a lot of guns, but where they really, really invest a great deal of money is ammunition. They have this belief that because of the Constitution that they'll never be able to take your firearm away, but there's nothing in the Constitution that says that you should have access to ammunition. And so if the government decides that they want to come for us, that they will cut off ammunition so nobody will have any bullets or anything, then your gun is nothing but just a fancy hammer. And so if they found 200 guns, I don't even want to know how many bullets they found. Truly, I'm sure it'll come out. It's going to be shocking. So the idea, I think, according to Craig and him talking to some of his neighbors and whatnot, who did not like him, what it was that the plan was that they were going to, I guess they were going to take over South Carolina. I don't know how far, but they had this, you know, they're very kind of schizotypal kind of, they just didn't want anybody around, and they didn't want to be messed with the luxuries of the modern day, which is fascinating because Rex is a fancy architect in Manhattan. It is unbelievable to find out somebody like that is planning on just falling off the face of the earth when he retires. It's just crazy. Another story that came up that I thought was interesting is, I'm a bit skeptical of this. I don't mind saying this, but the story goes, one of the young ladies working at the local grocery store, she never met Rex Heuerberger. He never did come in, but the mother and the son would very often come in a couple times a week. They would come in and shop, and they were paying for food with food stamps or the cards, the government cards. How is that possible? So I do know, you know, she still uses her maiden name. So is it possible they're not married, and maybe she's filing that she doesn't have, you know, that she's unemployed and she's taking care of a disabled child, or, you know, young adult child? But is that where they would get food stamps from? I just find that story very unusual, right? But anyway, this is what the lady said. And one thing that she did say is she said that and this answered one of my questions. I had sort of, you know, talked out loud wondering this other day, but the lady that works at the store, she said that the mother, you know, the wife always came in and that she always looked very, very depressed. So I think the guy probably was a really nasty, brutalizing kind of guy, you know, and for whatever reason had control of Asa. So it's interesting. Hey, Salty Sweet Tea, welcome. Yeah, we didn't do a roll call today, but thanks everybody for being here. I just thought of those two guys that had the Miranda room. So it's scary. Yeah. So the Google searches. I did it again. I hate when I do that. Okay. The Google searches that Uhrman made before the arrest were kind of interesting. There was a couple of them that, why could law enforcement not trace calls made by the Long Island serial killer? But they can, and they did. Why hasn't the Long Island serial killer been caught? Long Island serial killer phone call, but remember, he's making phone calls to the family members of the victims. He also seemed to like taking their phone, and then he would use their phones after death. He would use their phones to make phone calls. Now, was this a way to sort of torture the family members, kind of a sadistic type of behavior? Or was he trying to send a message? No, don't look for me. I'm alive and well. I just don't want to talk to you. So that was kind of, an interesting thought. FBI active serial killers. We know from the FBI that at any given time, there's between 25 and 50 serial killers that are active in the moment. Sometimes killers will take a break. They'll be in their cooling off period. Some of the guys, the cooling off period is 2 weeks or a month, but there have been some serial killers whose cooling off period was as much as like 9 years. That is very rare. Most of them kind of fall into this regular pattern, a month or so in between murders. So then he Googled serial killers by state 2023, which makes me go, really, Rex? Are you expecting some victims in maybe Nevada or South Carolina? Also, he Googled map of all known serial killers, unsolved serial killer cases, America's 5 most notorious cases. Does Rex want to be one of those? When he was arrested, he said to the cops, "Is this on the news?" Which I think is so typical. And let me explain why I say when it's so typical. I don't think he was saying, is this on the news, or did this make the news because, he really wants to be famous? I think he said, is this on the news? Because he doesn't want the people that know him, the people he's worked with, he doesn't want any of them to know that he's a disgusting serial killer. Maybe he didn't want his mom to know, or his fancy clients in Manhattan, his daughter perhaps. So yeah, is it on the news? Because I don't want anybody to know. Are we going to be able to hide this? You boys going to work with me and help me sweep this under the rug? And they're all like, no, Rex, this isn't going away. 11 currently active serial killers, 8 terrifying active serial killers we can't find. And then here's a curious one, John Bittroff. And I don't know if anybody else has talked about this yet. So John Bittroff was a man who was arrested for 2 of the murders that are just down the road from Gilgo, or not Gilgo, but the beach. The Gilgo, the beach area. And this guy was arrested for 2 of the murders in, is it what's it called? I forgot the name of the town. Maniville. I thought I wrote it down. Y'all are probably saying the name. For some reason, I didn't write it down. Maniville or Manoiville. And so John Bittroff actually ended up getting arrested. And in 2017, people began saying, oh, well, if he's guilty of killing these 2 women, maybe he is the Long Island serial killer. And so we need to try to, pin this on him, so to speak. So they actually, the two murders, Manorville on Long Island. Sorry about that. Manorville. So he was convicted for the murders of Rita Tangretti and Colleen McNamee. And they went missing in 1993 and then 1994. It was just a lucky break that he ended up getting caught. And the way that he ended up getting caught was that his brother got into some trouble. They were able to get DNA from the brother. And then through this, ever more sophisticated science, they were able to match up John Bittroff with the brother. And then when they tested his DNA, he was the guy. He was thought to be he was named as a main suspect for a lady's death, Sandra Costilla, who was murdered in 1993. And the way that she was murdered was very similar to the other two victims, but he has not ever been charged. So he was given back-to-back sentences, which keeps him in prison for a minimum of 50 years. And then we had some chiefs of police and whatnot, coming out and talking about what was the likelihood that he could be the guy. So I'll share this with you. Give you a picture of John Bittroff. So it's very interesting. Remember, the reason I'm talking about John Bittroff is because this was one of the results of Rex Heuerberger's Google searches. Now, it's interesting. It's not just a little side note. It's actually interesting because these guys lived in the same area. Their dump sites were the same. And he's a carpenter. And why is that interesting? Well, it's interesting because we know that Rex Heuerberger actually talked about being a carpenter, like he liked that more than he liked the fact that he was a architect in his interview with Bonjour Realty. So do they know each other? Is that possible that they know of each other? Does this make a case? I know, Kelly, like I'm up last night and I'm reading all this and putting all this together and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, they knew each other. Oh my God, they knew each other. So one of the reasons why this is interesting that they possibly may have known one another is the phone call of Shannan Gilbert. The phone call, the 911 call of Shannan Gilbert. And I've got a edited video that I've created that is the phone call, the 911 call, that I've pulled out parts of that call to focus on for a reason. Because, I did wild speculation, correct? Let's just own it. From this point forward now, we are in wild speculation, okay? But because of that 911 phone call, I listened to it, really got into it, trying to make some sense of what was going on, the voices in the background, that kind of thing. I am beginning to wonder if this is one of those odd, creepy groups that found each other on the internet, perhaps, and that what they were doing out there was something akin to hunting, right? We've seen Hollywood movies about this, but has there ever been an actual person who was actually hunting human beings. Maybe a known serial killer that was caught and tried and convicted. And yes, they were a hunter. Do any of you know if there has been a serial killer who was actually hunting? Let's see if anybody puts the name. Bebop. You are amazing with your true crime trivia. Yes, Hansen. Correct? Robert Hansen. Exactly. So Robert Hansen, called the Lonely Hearts Killer, his claim to fame. He started out as a rapist, serial rapist, arsonist. Ultimately, after buying his own airplane, he ended up becoming a serial killer. And his MO was he hunted prostitutes. He would find prostitutes. He'd promise them all these things and whatnot. And he liked to keep them for several days or weeks during the time that his wife and his children would be out of the home, traveling, visiting the lower 48 or whatever. And then when the time came, he'd load them up into his airplane. He'd fly them into the Alaska backcountry, and then he would set them loose to run, and he would hunt them. He would give them a head start, and then he would track them like one would track a deer or wild hogs. True. So this was going on in the 1980s. Hansen was originally born in Iowa in 1939. His parents were Christian, a Danish immigrant, and the mother's name was Edna Hansen. I thought that was interesting, a Danish immigrant, and he married a woman named Asa Ellerup. I'm talking about Rex, married a woman named Asa Ellerup, both kind of Scandinavian. His father and he had a very difficult relationship. His father was very strict and made him work long hours at the family-owned bakery. During his childhood, he was terribly bullied for a stutter, and he had severe acne. In school, he had no close friends. And this is that repeating pattern, that I've talked about in the past of affiliation, attachment, that having a group to identify with, feeling like developing the part of your identity, your personality, where you feel like you're a valued member in a group, which is really kind of the function that a gang in the inner city can serve, right? That is so valuable to our overall general personality and mental health, that without good attachment to someone, without a feeling that, I'm here on this earth, I'm alive and I'm valued, without that, people really go off the rails. And so that is one of the reasons that you see a lot of the kids that become school shooters and whatnot, the history behind them is that they were terribly bullied. They were mistreated. They were kept away from the social groups. Maybe people made fun of them. And we see that pattern with Bryan Kohberger. It's there. I know there's a group of people running around and they're trying to protect Kohberger, and they're saying, they're innocent and proven guilty in a jury of your peers. I understand. And all of that is absolutely 100% correct. But I am not an officer of the court. I haven't been chosen for jury duty. I'm not one of the attorneys. I haven't done evaluation for, testimony. I've not done any of that. I'm just a person looking at the facts of the Kohberger case and now the Heuermann case. And I'm considering what in the world went wrong. What went wrong to cause this guy, who really, for all intents and purposes, he could have been a dramatically, wildly successful architect, living in a beautiful home with a swimming pool and a happy wife, but he only got one half of that right. He only got one half of that dream right. The other half is hanging on to the past. Yerman is not completely developed. He's thriving in terms of his profession. When he gets to the island and he's Rex, the masterful architect, he's thriving. He's great. But as soon as he heads home and he gets into his neighborhood, he is now, I think, a hurt little boy. He's a hurt little boy that is still trying desperately to get the approval of his father. That's what I think is going on. What else would explain him keeping the house that he grew up in childhood and not changing it? It's got to be nostalgia. It's got to be nostalgia that would stop him from using his own training and his association with some of the best interior designers in the world. It's got to be nostalgia. And we hear a bit of that nostalgia in the interview with Bonjour Realty, where it's almost like kind of a bragging tone to say, oh, well, it's still the same house that I grew up in. And my dad taught me how to do woodwork, and I still go into that same shop where I first learned. It's quite nostalgic. And you have to stop and ask yourself, what would make a grown man, a successful architect, what would make him hang on, white knuckling, hanging on to his past and his relationship with his father? Lack of approval, poor attachment can do that. It's really tragic. It's really sad. We have so many people. It's kind of at the heart of abusive relationships. You'll see women get into relationships where, they may even be getting hit. There may be physical violence in the home, and they stay and they stay and they stay and they stay and they stay. And you ask them, why are you staying? You're going, last year you were in the emergency room 3 times from this guy, going off on you. Why are you staying? And the answer is, I just have to figure out what he wants me to do, and then he'll love me. I've just got to figure out what it is that he needs me to do, and then everything will be like it was when we first met. And that is just simply not true. It's not ever going to be the way it was when you first met. When you first met, he had not sent you to the emergency room. But these dynamics of child trauma shaping and forming our inability to walk away. That when you experience that trauma in childhood and you're not getting the approval, you're having very poor attachment with your primary caregivers, instead of valuing yourself and saying, I don't need to be treated this way. Buster, you're not going to treat me this way. I'm better off completely by myself without any man around than sitting around here and being your punching bag when you have a bad day or you drink too much beer. So done, I'm out of here. I'm better than this. I'm not doing this with you. But people that have that trauma, that childhood trauma, their identity stays fixed in that moment of lack of approval, and not being accepted, not being loved is more powerful than broken bones. And so they will stay in it forever rather than getting to a point to say, I'm done. I've had enough. I don't care anymore. There's nothing I'm ever going to do that's going to make you accept me or love me or give me approval. I'm out of here. So it's kind of sad. So this is just a theory that before people begin to freak out, oh, you can't diagnose. You can't. No, I can't. I cannot diagnose unless I do an interview and assessment with a person. And all I'm doing is reading articles just like you guys. So this is nothing but just a guess. It's just a consideration of the things that, dynamics that I know about from personality class, with some of the information that's been reported on. And this might be what has happened. this might explain, how he managed to get so far off track. He's living this life of this dichotomy, I think, where I kind of toyed with the idea of naming this video chaos and control, right? That was kind of what I was thinking. I thought, nah, it's too obscure. But it's the perfect example of chaos and control, that he's hyper controlled to the point that he becomes an expert in his field of study. And yet the minute he gets on the train and heads back home, he enters this life of chaos that may exemplify what his childhood was like with his father, and why he's kind of maintained that nostalgic type of connection to dear old dad. So it's just a guess, just a possibility only. So I'm thinking, just 1 second. I need a drink of water. Hold on. Okay. I needed a little break. Sorry. Been talking 45 minutes talking. Okay. Now then. So this idea, like Robert Hansen, the Lonely Hearts killer, or, who basically was a hunted people. You have that same mindset to prepping, living on the edge of the fringe areas of society, living in the wilderness, guns, self-sufficiency, man's man, so that is Robert Hansen and Rex Heuerberger and Craig Heuerberger kind of share that focus, right? And the fact that he targeted prostitutes, and the fact that he kept them for a little while, he would do this when the wife was out of town. And with Robert Hansen, we know that he actually would send the mother out of town. Why don't you go visit your mother, dear? So he would actually arrange to, have them gone. There were a few times where he did actually have women chained up in his basement while his wife was home. I mean, that was pretty crazy. So anyway, buys his own airplane. He gets to a point that, he gets rid of them by taking them out in the middle of the wilderness where no one can get to except for those that have an airplane. And to have a little fun, he just sets them loose to run. Now, when I was listening to the 911 call of Shannan Gilbert, it's a very strange phone call, and y'all are going to hear that on the video that I release. But it's a very strange phone call because it's clear that she's speaking to multiple people as she is on the phone with the 911 operator. She does not sound intoxicated or high. She sounds rational, and she sounds terrified, frightened. And you can hear her interacting with multiple men, no women, just men. And one of those men was her pimp, the guy that drove the car. And basically his job, they would set up the purchases of, services. They would set it up online, and then the driver would drive them, and they would say, well, it's a 2-hour session or a 4-hour session or whatever. And the driver would wait. And then at the end of the 2 hours would go in and say, okay, it's time to go home. So, pay her, give us our money, and we'll be out of here. So it was quite curious that Shannan refused to get in the car with the driver, Mike. Refused. And this was a guy that she had come to trust. This was a guy that that she knew was going to take her to her appointments. So the question was, why would she not trust the person that she had learned to trust? Now, the important part is who's in the room with them. And one of the people that was in the room was a out of work financial analyst, big money guy, lots of money, but a train wreck of a human being. Is that Rex's people? Is that his type of guy that accepts him and hangs out with him? I mean, they both are kind of living, the same kind of lives, successful professionally, but socially and personally, just a disaster. Such a disaster that, in order to have time with a woman, you have to pay her, right? It's the worst. So there is a wealthy financial analyst there in the room with her. There is also a man speaks that sounds exactly like Rex Heuerberger. Exactly. So he may be there. And then there was also a doctor. And the doctor, this is so interesting. Let me get this right. I don't want to misspeak here. Let me give you the right. Where's my notes? Hold on, I got some notes here. Okay. So the doctor had been a police. The doctor worked for the police. He was the I wanted to give the exact label, but he's basically the county medical examiner. The police surgeon is this guy. So he's there too. Dr. Peter Hackett. So there were some very unusual people that were there on when the phone call was happening to 911. She was surrounded by notable people. And my position is always arrest them. Why are you letting these guys walk around? I don't care if they're rich, important people. I don't care if they have ties to the police. That doesn't interest me at all. What interests me is that you have a young woman who is so frightened that she reaches out in a house that's full of apparently wealthy, rich, law enforcement associated older guys. She and another woman seem to be the only two females there. You can hear where she's saying, "Stop, you're hurting her." She says that. So there's obviously another girl that was there with her during this appointment. And the men were all saying, "Come on, you got to go outside, got to go." And she did not want to go outside. She was refusing to go outside. And so Mike, I guess the men went out and got the driver, and his name is Mike. And you can hear him saying, "Come on, you know who I am, let's go," And she's like, "No, stay away from me. No, there's somebody after me." And she just kept saying that to the 911 operator. And I'm going to tell you, as soon as she finally gets up and goes outside, you can hear her just start screaming and screaming and screaming. And so I wonder, were they hunting her? I know it's a nightmare scenario. The whole thing is a nightmare. I mean, I don't know how you make this nice and cushy and sweet little story. It's horrific. And the location that these people were at, this doctor, he actually was the one who erased the cameras. They had security footage where she was at, the house where she was at, that they would have easily had the security footage, and it got erased. And none of them ever got arrested. None of them were held. There was no pressure put on them. And it's obscene. It's obscene what happened. So people basically said, oh, well, that's a rich, fancy man compared to a prostitute. So let's protect the wealthy, fancy people. And if that is what happened, what is the likelihood that Rex was there as a part of a group? And it does sound like his voice on the recording. And like I said, I did the Camtasia video. I'll be releasing that this afternoon, and you'll hear his voice. I am convinced that he was there, that it was his voice. I don't think this was him secretly getting one of these girls and then secretly killing her and dumping her on the side of the road. I think they may have been doing something really a nightmare, just a nightmare. So, all right. So, other people, let's see. So, Mari is Shannan Gilbert's mother. Okay, Mari. So she is Shannan Gilbert's mother, and the Gilgo 4 and what ultimately ends up being 10 other people, they were not discovered until Mari raised hell and said, my daughter is missing. We know that my daughter was here at this man's house, and I'm not leaving until somebody finds my daughter. So she really, caused a big, hullabaloo, and wouldn't let them get away with, oh, come on, little lady, just move along, calm down. She was not being treated that way. And as a result of her pressure and her determination, that is actually when they began to find the lost girls, the bodies of the remains of these girls. It was very sad because while they were unearthing these 4 young women, none of them were Shannan. And she really, really pushed. The last client was a guy, Joseph Brewer, the financial analyst. He admittedly said, yes, she showed up at my house at night. I would not have sex with her because she looked like a man. No, she didn't. She was very beautiful. But he said she looked like a man, so I just wouldn't mess with her. So I don't know what happened to her, but I didn't do anything to her. This is the same night that she calls and says, they're trying to hurt me. Someone's after me. And you hear a guy that sounds like Rex. You can hear Mike, and then you can hear another man's voice. And maybe it is this James Burke, right? So my thoughts, as I was going through this, I thought, is that what their game was? Were these creepy, sadistic S&M type of men had a little group, a little club or whatever, and they were terrorizing sex workers, and then the girls that would comply, they survived, with the promise that they wouldn't say anything. But if you fought back, if you said, no, I'm not going to do this, then something bad happened. And it was very sad because with Shannan Gilbert, her voice last heard at the house of this rich financial analyst. He refused to let the police search behind his house, his property. Okay, in Texas, you don't have to give permission for them to search. The cops say, I'm here with a warrant. and then you're just like, oops, okay. So why didn't the cops, they're digging up the other side of the street. They're digging up the side of the street where the beach is, but not the marshy side that was back behind his house. Well, finally, about 16, 18 months after they original, 16 months after Mari raised Holy Hell, and they found, as a result of her trying to find her daughter, they ended up finding the Gilgo 4. About 16, 18 months after that, the guy that was acting chief of police, he finally said, we're going behind the marsh, we're searching, and they found Shannan. So that night, the night that she was frightened and she was afraid to go outside, and it's all captured on this 911 call, it seems like perhaps on that night, once she got outside, maybe they were going to try to do, their thing. And instead of her running toward the open beach, maybe her instincts told her, no, go back the other way, go into where there's going to be trees and places to hide. And she ended up back, in the marsh. So it's there's a lot of detail. If you take time and sort of put it all together, that it tells a very terrifying tale. So that it was interesting to me that Rex Heuerberger recently, within the last 12 months, that he was Googling John Bitloff. He would have been aware of his arrest in 2017 and being found guilty for the 2 murders. And my thoughts were, is John Bitloff an innocent man? That's what I wondered, because everything else that Heuerberger is Googling, it's all like unsolved cases, and can the cops trace this or trace that? So it's kind of shocking. The Gilgo 4, they went missing from 2007 to about 2010 or 11, I think. The 2 women that Bitloff was arrested for killing, their disappearances were in 2014, and they were a little bit further down from Gilgo. And so I think anybody that, has an interest, academic interest in the phenomenon of serial killers and how they operate, I think everybody is saying, no, there's more women out there. You just hadn't put it together, but there's no way this guy was this prolific, and then just said, okay, I'm going to take a 10-year hiatus. Oh no, he was hunting somewhere. I think they're searching in New York, for some reason, Michigan, and I'm sure South Carolina is looking. So they're looking to see where he was active, what he was doing. So following his travel, itineraries and whatnot, they'll probably find more. It says also there was speculation talking about Bitroff. There was speculation that a local business owner named James Bissett took his own life after Shannan was found. He ran a nursery, which was the main supplier for that particular type of burlap. So that was kind of interesting. Of the 6, so there were the 4 original victims, the Gilgo 4, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello. There were 6 more bodies found in the vicinity, but the MO seemed a little bit different. Of the 6 victims found, only 1 has been identified, and that is Jessica Taylor. The unidentified bodies are 3 women and a man, an Asian man, who is dressed in women's clothing. I think that is so interesting because some of the pornography found on Rex Heuerberger's computer was Asian trans. Also, there was a baby who was the child of one of these unidentified 3. So I'm kind of sitting around going, come on, y'all. Nowhere do we have a young mother and her toddler reported as missing in the whole United States of America. There's got to be a young mother with a missing child. It has to be. So that is very interesting that it hasn't been identified. The women were dismembered, but the Gilgo 4 were not dismembered. So starting in 2017 up to today, there's been talk among the police, law enforcement involved and whatnot, that actually they were dealing with the work of 2 serial killers, or at least 2, but it looks like 2. Again, that takes me back to that chilling phone call where you've got 2 young women in a room and all these middle-aged men standing around. It's just chilling. It's chilling to really think about. They believe that the Gilgo 4, the placement of the Gilgo 4, they believe that it was like a trophy ground, that the serial killer placed the bodies in a way that, like Ted Bundy, he would be able to come back and visit, That they also think that because of the way the bodies were found, that the killer absolutely took trophies. So that he would have had something that he would have kept with him, maybe at his house or his office, but there would have been something that he would have kept that it would remind him, and he would feel connected and feel close to those that he murdered. In the says the official line in November 2011 from the police was that they were searching for a single killer responsible for all 10 deaths. Shannan's death was ruled a misadventure. Makes me furious. A misadventure, with police concluding that she drowned or died of exposure, even though a missing bone in her neck could have indicated strangulation. And I think they did later prove that she was strangled. The police refused to release information on the belt that had the initials WH or HM, which are deciding if you got it upside down or not. And they refused to release the 911 call. It was 13 years before they finally released the call. Well, you got 2 wealthy old white guys on the recording. Maybe that's why they didn't want to. Maybe they were exerting some pressure, Don't you know who I am? I'm a fancy architect in Manhattan, sir. If you release that 911 call with my voice on it, I just might have to sue your ass. Okay, sir. We won't release it. Creepy phone calls to Melissa Barthelomew's sister. This was actually something that Rex is accused of doing multiple times. He would make contact with family members and then describe what he did to their loved one. So that is the dark tetrad, the addition of the sadism factor. And once you take the dark triad and you add sadism as a variable, that gives you the dark tetrad. And then you have a model that will actually discriminate and pick out the serial killers as opposed to simply violent criminals. You cannot, I'm telling you, with these guys, you cannot take out the sadistic nature that is in them all. Okay, then there are other victims, potential victims. And then the chief of police at the time, this is the last one. I'm going to give you the last little bit of trivia here related to this terrible event. The chief of police at the time made some very questionable decisions, and it later came out that he was a regular procurement of prostitutes. That he purchased prostitutes all the time. So did he have an in? I'm not saying, don't get me wrong here. I am not saying, not for a moment. I don't think he's the serial killer, or that he knew Rex, or that he was there the night that Shannan Gilbert died. But it shows you how people's own weaknesses and their own attempts to protect themselves can have really devastating effects on other people, that he may have been so worried about protecting himself and his secret life. He didn't want his family to find out. He didn't want his officers to know what he was doing. That maybe that is why it took 13 years to figure this out, because once they formed the cold case research group, not Cold Case Foundation, but they formed a research group there to specifically to try to solve the case of the Long Island killer. Maybe it would have been solved much sooner if you had not had a chief of police who was compromised. So, all right. Mystic Butterfly, welcome. Fractured Fairy Tales, how are you doing? All right, good grief. Was law enforcement helping them cover it up? I don't know that it was like they were trying to cover it up. I don't think so. I think it was more of the personal influences of the people that were in charge, right? That if you now have this guy who's running around murdering sex workers, and you are the head of the snake in your department, you're the big guy, and you know damn well that you've been purchasing services, from prostitutes. No, you don't want this in the newspaper. You from your own personal need to protect yourself. You don't want somebody coming forth and saying, "Oh, well, let me tell you about, Chief of Police Officer Schnazzy McFazzy. I saw him purchasing 2 prostitutes last week, blah, blah, blah." He didn't want to deal with that. He didn't want that coming out. He didn't want his wife or his family learning that. And he didn't want the other officers, to know. So where was internal affairs? Where was their investigation into this guy? Why would he have been in charge of working a case with the whole prostitution angle? He should never been in charge of it. So, and then that fear that we all have that someone wealthy, well-educated, someone who really has the ability to sue you and really make it hurt. If they say, if you release that phone call that has my voice on it, and I'm not giving you, permission to do that, if you do it, I'm going to sue you. That can make someone who is already compromised, oh my gosh, if he sues us, then it's all going to come out about me messing around with prostitutes and my life is over. And so maybe it's easier to just say, no, we're not going to release the 911 call because it could interfere with the investigation. That is correct, Truth Seeker. Just like with Robert Henson in Alaska. This could happen in this type of scenario because we're all people and we all carry our own flaws and our own, picadillos. It could happen anywhere. People are just people. And that is one of the reasons why it is so important that everyone should have some oversight. No one should be at the top of the ladder, that they're unaccountable. Absolutely. Because when that happens, that's when you end up getting people in charge of cults. When you end up with Chad Daybell, when someone is given ultimate control and no one has the power for oversight or to hold them accountable, that's when things get really gross. So, it was just a bad set of circumstances that a lot of these men themselves were compromised, not because they were evil, horrible people, because they're just, human beings, unscrupulous, perhaps unprincipled, maybe, but they made some bad decisions. Yes, Cinnamon. Yes. Calling the parents, calling the sisters, using the murdered girls, using their telephones to make telephone calls to give the illusion that someone's still alive, perhaps. So it's pretty shocking story. And really at the end of it, it just leaves you feeling sad, doesn't it? It's so there's so much loss. And I'm going to tell you, I look at all these people, how ugly this whole situation was. Rex and Craig, they probably have a hell of a story to tell about their childhood. That would be my guess. So, all right. Ooh, my goodness, that was a long live. You guys are troopers. Thank you for staying and, kind of getting through it with me. I think it is very interesting to look at the various people that were ultimately involved in this, because as the journalists are telling this tale, what is it you hear? What are they saying? Prostitutes missing, sex workers murdered. That's the focus. And the reality for me is, can we talk about the rich, powerful men that were in the story too? Because that is interesting. So let's change the narrative a little bit. These women did not deserve to die just because they were, needing to make money. They did not deserve what they ultimately got. And perhaps there may be more than just Mr. Rex Heuerberger that needs to be held accountable. There may be other men that were there that night. Their voice is recognizable, should be held accountable. I think the financial analyst should be held accountable. I think the doctor should absolutely be held accountable. They know what happened. They know what happened. And because they're wealthy and they can exert power, it all got pushed back. Allegedly. Right? Simply my opinion. And it's a really good reflection of what happens when people find themselves with a serious power differential, right? We have to really be careful about giving people unchecked power. Got to really be careful. All right. Thank y'all. Y'all are amazing. I appreciate you coming here and listening. If you haven't subscribed, I hope you will. At the very least, please hit the thumbs up if you enjoyed the content. I'll be back.